You know that scene in Scarface where Michelle Pfeiffer looks at Al Pacino with pure disgust? That wasn't acting. During filming, she cried herself to sleep every single night. Pacino didn't want her in the movie. He kept his distance on set, and yet, 8 years later, he specifically requested her for another film. What really happened between them? The truth is stranger than the rumors. At 85 years old, Al Pacino has worked with everyone in Hollywood. Most love him, but 6 collaborations went so wrong. They're still talked about in whispers on film sets today. And before we expose what really happened, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button, because the story I'm about to tell you will completely change how you see The Godfather, Scarface, and some of cinema's greatest films. 1982, Michelle Pfeiffer is nobody. Her biggest credit? Grease 2, which completely bombed. Now she's auditioning for Scarface, one of the most anticipated films of the decade. Everyone wants to play Elvira, the trophy wife, the ice queen, the woman who represents everything Tony Montana can buy but never truly have. Al Pacino has casting approval, and he doesn't approve of Michelle Pfeiffer. According to producer Martin Bregman, Pacino thought she was too soft for the role. He wanted someone with edge, experience, danger. He suggested several established actresses, but Bregman saw something in Pfeiffer's audition and pushed for a callback. The callback takes place in New York with Pacino himself. Pfeiffer is terrified. This is Al Pacino, Michael Corleone, Serpico, the biggest star in Hollywood. She's so nervous, so desperate to prove she belongs, that during an intense confrontation scene, she accidentally strikes Pacino hard enough to draw blood. The room goes dead silent. Everyone's looking for where the blood is coming from. Then they see it. It's coming from Al Pacino. Michelle Pfeiffer has just made Al Pacino bleed in an audition. According to those present, most actors would have exploded. Pacino? He reportedly smiled and said something like, "Now that's the edge I was looking for." But getting the part was just the beginning of Pfeiffer's nightmare. On set, she was isolated. It was a 6-month shoot, and she was one of only 2 women in the main cast. Pacino kept his distance. He referred to her formally. No warm-ups between takes, no friendly conversation, just cold professionalism. Years later, on the Skinny Confidential podcast, Pfeiffer revealed the truth. "I cried myself to sleep almost every night on Scarface. I had such a lack of hope that I would ever get this part. And then when I got it, I was terrified I was going to be bad. But watch their scenes together now. That coldness, that distance, it's perfect." Tony Montana and Elvira aren't supposed to have chemistry. They're supposed to have transaction. He buys her like he buys everything else. She tolerates him for the lifestyle. The discomfort between the actors became the discomfort between the characters. Now here's where it gets interesting. 8 years later, Pacino is casting a small romantic drama called Frankie and Johnny. He could choose any actress in Hollywood. Who does he specifically request? Michelle Pfeiffer, the woman he supposedly couldn't stand. You don't request someone you hate for an intimate character drama. By 1991, Pfeiffer was a major star. She didn't need Pacino anymore, but she said yes. In interviews about that film, she called him generous, kind, and supportive. Whatever happened on Scarface had transformed into mutual respect. Sometimes the worst beginnings create the strongest professional bonds. 1973, 2 of America's greatest actors meet on the set of Scarecrow. Gene Hackman, fresh off his Oscar win for The French Connection. Al Pacino, fresh off The Godfather. This should be acting heaven. It was acting hell. Before filming, both actors decided to go full method. They dressed as hobos, grew out their beards, and actually hitchhiked through California to understand their characters. They slept under bridges. They ate from trash cans. They lived as drifters for days. But when they got to set, everything changed. Hackman was old school Hollywood. 20 years in the business taught him one thing: time is money. Show up prepared, know your lines, nail the take, go home. He'd learned his craft in television where you get 1, maybe 2 takes before moving on. Pacino was the new generation. Actors studio trained, method to his core. Between takes, he'd pace around, smoking, muttering his lines, staying in character. He wanted to try scenes multiple ways, find different emotional colors, discover the truth in the moment. According to crew members, Hackman would literally check his watch while Pacino prepared. One crew member later recalled Hackman saying, "We could have shot 3 scenes by now." Jerry Schatzberg, the director, found himself managing 2 completely different energies. Hackman wanted to work, Pacino wanted to explore. It was like watching a Swiss watchmaker try to collaborate with a jazz musician. Years later, Pacino admitted in an interview, "Working with Gene wasn't the easiest. We had different approaches. But here's what nobody talks about. Gene Hackman has called Scarecrow his personal favorite performance of his entire career." Let that sink in. The film where he was most frustrated, most challenged, most pushed out of his comfort zone, that's the one he's most proud of. Watch Scarecrow today, and you see why. Hackman's grounded, desperate Max against Pacino's nervous, childlike lion. They're not trying to match each other because they can't. Instead, they're 2 different instruments playing the same sad song. The film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, the highest honor in international cinema. Sometimes the best art comes from people who can barely stand to be in the same room. This is the big one, the rivalry everyone talks about, Al Pacino versus Robert De Niro, 2 kings fighting for one throne. Except that's not what happened. The real story is much more interesting. These 2 came up together in New York's theater scene in the 60s. They studied under the same teachers. They auditioned for the same roles. They both tested for Michael Corleone. Can you imagine? De Niro as Michael Corleone instead of Pacino? In The Godfather Part 2, they played the same character decades apart. They never shared a single scene, never even met on set, but their performances had to match perfectly. Young Vito had to believably become old Michael. That requires a special kind of artistic communication, a dialogue conducted entirely through performance. Then came Heat in 1995, the first time these 2 legends would actually share the screen. The whole world was watching. What would happen when these 2 forces finally collided? Michael Mann, the director, made a brilliant decision. He kept them completely apart until their big scene, the famous diner confrontation where cop and criminal sit down for coffee. No rehearsal together, no discussion of approach. Mann wanted to capture lightning in a bottle. According to those on set, De Niro liked to prepare quietly, internally, building his character through research and contemplation. Pacino brought external energy, discovering his character through action and interaction. Mann had to essentially direct 2 different movies that happened to intersect. The result? 8 minutes of the most riveting cinema ever filmed. 2 masters making it up as they go, testing each other's rhythms, playing jazz with dialogue. When asked about De Niro, Pacino said, "Bob's a craftsman. I'm more instinct. We work differently." De Niro's response when asked about Pacino? "He's good at what he does. That's it. No gushing, no stories, just professional acknowledgement. They're not best friends. They don't vacation together, but they're also not enemies. There's something rarer, true peers who respect each other's work without needing to be friends." In The Irishman, they played best friends whose relationship ends in betrayal and murder. Art imitating life? Not really. More like 2 professionals who understand that chemistry doesn't require friendship. The media wants them to be rivals because it's a better story. The truth? They're 2 guys who happen to be geniuses at the same thing. That's not rivalry. That's just Tuesday in Hollywood. This one hurts because it started with such promise. Marlon Brando personally fought for Al Pacino to get the role of Michael Corleone. The studio wanted Robert Redford. Can you imagine? Robert Redford as Michael Corleone? Coppola was under enormous pressure to cast a known star. But Brando saw something in this unknown theater actor from the Bronx. He threatened to walk if they didn't cast Pacino. That's not nothing. That's everything. But once filming began, things got complicated. Brando was already Brando. He could show up hours late. He could refuse to learn his lines and demand cue cards. He could mumble through takes. And everyone just dealt with it because he was Marlon Brando. Pacino? He was nobody, fighting for every scene. having to prove himself daily. If he showed up 5 minutes late, there'd be phone calls to the studio. Then came the Oscars. Both men were brilliant in The Godfather, but the studio played games with the categories. They submitted Pacino for supporting actor, even though he had more screen time than Brando. The message was clear. Brando is the star. Pacino is lucky to be there. Brando won Best Actor and famously sent Sachin Littlefeather to refuse it in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. Pacino boycotted the ceremony entirely, but for a different reason. He was protesting being diminished to supporting actor. Same action, completely different motivations. In interviews decades later, Pacino's language about Brando is revealing. He calls him influential and groundbreaking, but never generous or warm. He acknowledges the debt but doesn't express affection. When Brando died in 2004, every major actor released emotional tributes. Pacino, 2 sentences. He acknowledged Brando's contribution to cinema and sent condolences to the family. That's it. No memories, no anecdotes, nothing personal. In Hollywood, where everyone pretends to love everyone, that silence is deafening. But here's what matters. Pacino never trashed Brando publicly, never sold tell-all stories, never cashed in on their complicated relationship. That's respect, even without affection. That's professionalism, even without friendship. Glengarry Glen Ross, one of the greatest scripts ever written. An all-star cast including Jack Lemmon, Kevin Spacey, and Alec Baldwin. And Al Pacino as Ricky Roma, the smoothest salesman in a room full of desperate men. Director James Foley came from music videos. He was used to total control, every shot planned, every movement choreographed. He'd storyboarded the entire film before anyone arrived on set. Then Al Pacino showed up. Pacino didn't change the dialogue. Nobody changes David Mamet's dialogue. But everything else was fair game. He wanted to prowl the set like a caged tiger. He'd do one take sitting, the next standing, the next walking around. Each time, completely different. Jack Lemmon, watching this unfold, later said it was like watching 2 prize fighters who forgot they were on the same team. The explosion came during Pacino's famous monologue about the Cadillac. Foley wanted to shoot it in pieces for editing options. Standard Hollywood procedure. Get coverage from every angle, have options in post-production. Pacino refused. He needed to do it in one continuous take. He needed the build, the momentum, the unbroken emotional journey. According to those present, they argued for hours while the cast retreated to their trailers and producers watched money burn. Finally, Pacino got his way. Watch that scene now. Pacino's Ricky Roma is mesmerizing. He's selling worthless Florida swampland like it's the last chance at paradise. The performance feels dangerous because it was. An actor on the edge, fighting his director, pouring that tension into the character. But wait, here's what nobody mentions. Foley and Pacino worked together again 3 years later on a small film called 2 Bits. It wasn't a big success, but think about it. You don't reunite with someone you hate for a quiet period drama. The friction had produced fire, and both men were professional enough to recognize it. This is the collaboration that still makes Hollywood insiders uncomfortable. William Friedkin was untouchable in 1980. The French Connection, The Exorcist, 2 of the biggest films of the decade. He was God's gift to directing. Al Pacino was post-Godfather royalty. When they announced Cruising, everyone expected a masterpiece. They got a disaster that's still controversial today. Friedkin wanted military discipline on set. Actors who showed up with lines memorized, ready to work, no discussion. He'd earned that authority through his success. Pacino showed up late, sometimes without knowing his lines. He wanted to explore the character, a straight cop going undercover in New York's leather scene. He wanted to understand the psychological toll. Friedkin later told The Wrap that Pacino gave me a rough time for reasons other than the normal actor-director relationship. He revealed he'd originally wanted Richard Gere for the role. According to some accounts, Friedkin nearly fired Pacino in the first week. The film was already controversial. Gay rights activists protested daily. The production was a nightmare. And at the center, 2 titans who couldn't agree on anything. But here's the twist. nobody talks about. That tension, that discomfort, that's exactly what the film needed. Cruising is about a man losing himself in a world he doesn't understand. Pacino looks genuinely uncomfortable, genuinely lost, genuinely struggling with identity. Because he was struggling with his director, struggling with the material, struggling with the protests outside. In his 2024 memoir, Pacino expressed deep regret about Cruising, not because of Friedkin, but because of its impact on the gay community. He donated his entire salary to charity. When asked about the film, he often changes the subject. When Friedkin died in 2023, Pacino declined all requests for comment, not one word. In Hollywood, where everyone eulogizes everyone, that silence tells you everything. Here's what all these stories have in common. The tension created the art. Cruising is a cult classic precisely because it's so uncomfortable. Scarecrow won at Cannes because two incompatible actors created magic. Scarface works because Pacino and Pfeiffer had no chemistry. Glengarry Glen Ross crackles with energy because the actor and director were at war. Al Pacino isn't difficult. He's uncompromising. There's a difference. Difficult means you're hard to work with for no reason. Uncompromising means you'll fight for the art even if it makes everyone uncomfortable. At 85, Pacino is still working, still fighting, still creating. His new horror film, The Ritual, comes out this April. He's got 6 more films in production. He's not maintaining enemy lists or nursing grudges. He's doing what he's always done, whatever it takes to find the truth in a performance. That's the real Al Pacino story, not the feuds, not the fights, the films, the performances that last forever, the moments that make us forget we're watching an actor at all. If this blew your mind, hit subscribe right now because next week we're exposing what really happened between Marilyn Monroe and JFK, with evidence that's never been shown on YouTube before. And comment below, which of these collaborations shocked you the most? Because I'm curious if you saw the Pfeiffer twist coming. Look, in the end, Hollywood wants you to believe in feuds and enemies because it sells magazines. The truth is messier, but more interesting. Sometimes people don't get along. Sometimes that creates terrible films. But sometimes, just sometimes, that friction creates magic. And that magic, that's what we're still watching 50 years later.